About 10 or 11 years ago, some colleagues of mine and I went to a lecture on feline diabetes given by a small animal internal medicine specialist named Dr. Deborah Greco. We expected to hear about insulins, we expected to hear about protocols, and we did. But Dr. Greco talked about some unexpected things. She talked about why she thought that feline diabetes has become so much more common in the past few decades compared to in the past. And then she talked a lot about what we're feeding our cats. Not just diabetic cats, but all our cats. Based on that talk, my colleagues and I started implementing her dietary recommendations for our feline diabetic patients. And that following week, I changed up how we were feeding our own cats in our house. And what we found was that Dr. Greco's recommendations work. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. I want to be really, really clear up front. I am not a nutritionist. I am not a specialist. I am a veterinarian in general practice with about 10 years clinical observations, working with the kind of diets we're going to be talking about today. I don't have all the answers. Frankly, when it comes to nutrition, whether it's cat nutrition or human nutrition, nobody has all the answers. What I hope to do today is tell you what some of the current thinking is, what the controversies are, and I hope give you some tools to decide what you think the best diet is for your cat's long-term health. So commercial cat food has been around since about the late 1800s, but it did not come into widespread or widely popular use until the mid-20th century. And this was about the time that food manufacturers started using a process called extrusion to make pet food. Now, extrusion process had already been used to make human food, like breakfast cereals and things like that. But when it was applied to pet food, for the first time it became possible to have mass production of a dry kibble that was shelf-stable, consistent in quality, highly convenient for owners to use, complete and balanced. And so this is what a lot of us have grown up with. This is what a lot of our cats are used to. And today, about 65% of all cat food sold in the US is in the form of dry kibble. Convenient, cost-effective, and complete. I mean, what's not to like about this? Well, unfortunately, somewhere in all there, a fourth C got forgotten, and that was the cat. Cats are not small dogs, but we've been feeding them like dogs for decades. And one of the main reasons that they're different from dogs is that cats are obligate carnivores. What this means is that there are several critical nutrients that dogs and people and other species can make in our own bodies, but cats can't. They can't make these nutrients. They have to get them from their food. And the only food that has these nutrients is meat. Cats have to eat meat in order to survive. Cats also have, compared to dogs and other species, a very high protein requirement in their diets. Many species, like people, are most efficient at getting our energy from carbohydrates. Cats are actually most efficient at getting energy from protein. Everything in their physiology, from the design of their teeth, the length of their intestines, their salivary enzymes, their liver enzymes, has evolved and adapted to a diet of small prey species. Rodents, rabbits, birds, amphibians, insects, even small reptiles. I did have a client when I was years ago in the Sierra Nevadas whose young cat became expert at actually killing and eating rattlesnakes. And he saw him do it. So if we want to know what cats ought to be eating, it makes sense to look at what cats do eat when people are out of the picture. So if we look at typical prey species, several studies have actually done this, looking at typical prey species, analyzing stomach contents in feral cats, things like that. Let's look at what's in that. First of all, the water content is about 70%. This is an important point. We're going to come back to this later. But for right now, we're going to take the water out, and we're going to look at what's left. Specifically, we're going to look at the 3 macronutrients. And this is protein, fat, and carbohydrates. All calories in food, whether it's cat food, people food, dog food, whatever, all calories in food come from protein, fat, and carbohydrate. So many nutritionists like to look at the percentage of calories that are coming from each of these constituents. So when we look at that, and there's going to be some variation depending on the particular kind of prey species, but they all fit this general profile. About 52% of calories coming from protein, about 46% from fat, about 2% from carbohydrate. Well, let's compare that to dry food. Now, I have premium in quotes, not to be snarky, but as a reminder for me to just mention to you guys, we use the term premium all the time. And this premium food and that premium food, ultra premium, super premium, there is no objective standard that a food has to meet to be called premium. It is mostly a marketing term. It doesn't mean these foods are not higher quality. It just means that there's really no definition for this. And just FYI, all the foods that I'm going to be referencing here, I'm not going to refer to any of them by name, but every example I have in here is a premium food. So this dry food, water content, let's look at that first, 10% water. Now that's pretty standard for a dry food. They're usually 10 to 12% water. Big difference between that and typical prey species. And this gets us back to that really, really important point. Cats have a low thirst drive. Unlike dogs, who drink out of every rain puddle they come across, cats typically do not seek out water sources, not often, not consistently. Cats have evolved to get their water from their food. They take in their water as they eat. So it's really tempting if we're feeding dry food to think, well, they make up for it at the water bowl. And it's true that cats that are eating dry food do drink more out of the water bowl than cats eating canned food. But studies have shown that cats on dry food are only taking in about half as much total water as cats eating canned food, which we think is why cats eating dry food are at much higher risk for urinary issues than cats on canned food. So this is one of the big advantages of canned food. Okay, we're going to pull the water out like we did before. And the reason we're doing that, you guys probably know, but if you're trying to compare percentages of nutrients in foods that have different water content, all the percentages are going to be skewed. It's apples to oranges. If we pull all that water out, now we're looking at an equivalent basis, apples to apples. So we pull the water out, and we see that we have about 35% of the calories coming from protein, about 19% from fat, and about over 40% from carbohydrates. So that's a big difference. And that's not a surprise, because extrusion methods that make dry kibble have to be high in carbohydrates just in order to work. Well, let's go ahead and compare that with a canned food. Oh, sorry, forgot a slide. Carbohydrates in typical feline prey run anywhere between 0 and 10%, usually less than 5%. Carbs in dry food run anywhere between 30 to 55%, sometimes even more. So we just cannot get dry food that is going to be in the range of typical prey that cats eat. What about canned food? So first, let's look at that water content, 78%. Well, that's much better. That gets us really right in the range that a cat would be eating if they were eating prey. Again, we're going to take that water out. And here we have 46% of the calories coming from protein, about 50% from fat, about 4% from carbs. Well, this looks good. So we're done. Go feed canned food. We can go have a beer. Just to be sure we're on track, let's look at a different canned food. See any big differences on this one? Yeah, the fat level. This cat is getting almost twice as many calories from fat as he is from protein. So that's different. The carbs look good, but what's going on with that fat? And many, if not most, canned cat foods on the market are somewhere in this profile. Not all of them are this skewed, but where the fat content, the calories coming from fat, are higher than that from the protein. Why is that? Is that because the pet food companies just forgot? Fat's cheaper. Protein is the most expensive ingredient in any given food. Fat is a lot cheaper. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more later. All right, well, let's see if we have better luck with the third canned food. Oh, 25% carbs. And if you notice, these are all premium foods. You're paying top dollar for all these foods. You're not getting these at the grocery store. You're making a separate trip to the pet store to pick these up, right? So carbohydrate levels in canned cat foods range anywhere between 0 and 35%. Point being, not all canned cat foods are created equal. Well, so what? Just because cats don't normally or naturally eat higher levels of carb, does this mean that higher levels of carbs are bad? This is actually a really legitimate question. Cats can utilize carbs. It's not, like they can't. So is this a problem for them? Well, this is where the fifth C comes in, and that's controversy. The debate is raging on this. And quite frankly, it's because we don't know. There just are not enough studies done to know whether or not low-carb foods are better for cats' long-term health than foods that are high in carbohydrate. We just honestly don't know. And even if everyone did agree that low-carb diets are better for cats, which they don't, it gets even murkier because, well, what's low? How low should the carbohydrates be? And nobody knows that either. So for people who do advocate high-protein, low-carb canned diets, most people are aiming to get the carbohydrate level down below 10%. Many people say under 7%. And just so you know, that's just based on speculation and clinical experience, not hard data. So at this point, we're kind of guessing. So what I can tell you is that, what my clinical experience has been over the last 10 or 11 years using high-protein, low-carb canned diets. And talking with other practitioners and with internal medicine specialists, I know that my experiences are not unique. So what are the situations where I am routinely recommending high-protein, low-carb foods to my clients? First, obesity. Obesity and overweight, for sure, the number one nutritional problem we see in cats and dogs. And the cats that I see coming in that are overweight or obese, in my experience, have pretty much all been on dry food. I have yet to see, I've been in practice for 25 years, I have yet to see a cat on all canned food coming in this heavy. I'm not saying it can't happen because too many calories are too many calories. It doesn't matter what you're feeding. And if the cat's overeating, they're going to get heavy. But I can say that in my clinical experience, these cats, they're all on either entirely dry or mostly dry with a little bit of canned. Many of them have the dry food available all the time. And not all cats will get fat on that, but a lot of them will. A lot of cats cannot tolerate, I think, that level of carbohydrates. So over the years, in the 15 years before I started using high-protein, low-carb canned diets, we tried all the recommended ways to get weight off these guys. All the recommended diets, all the recommended protocols, and it did not work. I mean, we might get a little bit of weight loss. It usually didn't last. It got to the point where if I could keep a cat from gaining a pound or two every year between annual visits, it's like, woohoo, success, And so, that just didn't seem fabulous. So after Dr. Greco's talk, we started using high-protein, low-carb canned diets see, can we get weight off these cats? And that has worked. So for the first time, we were able to get weight off these cats consistently. Now, I need to emphasize, and most of you probably already know this, but I need to emphasize that weight loss in cats has to be done very carefully. Weight loss that is too rapid, these cats are at high risk for a liver disease called hepatic lipidosis, which is extremely severe, requires intensive treatment, and even with treatment is fatal in about 20% of cases. We also have to be careful we're not inadvertently creating a protein deficiency. Remember, cats have that absolute dietary requirement for high protein, right? Well, if we just cut the calories back, we can inadvertently create a situation where the cat's not getting their daily protein requirement. And how does the cat handle that? If they're not getting their protein every day, then what does the cat do? It's like, oh, well, I'll just change my entire metabolism, so make it okay. No, what they do is they start burning their own muscles. And they'll lose weight all right, but they're losing it because they're burning up their muscle to get the protein that they need. And obviously that's not what we want. So because of these reasons, I strongly recommend that weight loss in overweight and obese cats be done in consultation with a veterinarian or a board-certified veterinary nutritionist. Diabetes. High-protein, low-carb canned diets have been called the major advance in diabetes treatment in cats in the last 10 years. Studies have shown that these diets improve cats' sensitivity to insulin. What that means is that if I have a diabetic cat that's eating dry food and we switch him to a high-protein, low-carb canned food, we virtually always have to drop his insulin dose, usually by 50% or more. We have higher percentages of these cats going into diabetic remission where they don't need insulin anymore, and they tend to stay in remission for longer. Urinary issues. Now, here I'm not talking specifically high protein, low carb. This is where the canned really, really is important. As you guys probably know, there's a number of different kinds of urinary issues that cats can get, and if I have a cat that has a diagnosis that requires a specific prescription diet, then at least I try and make sure that that cat will eat the canned version rather than the dry, if the cat will eat it. If they don't require a specific prescription diet, then I want them on canned to reduce the risk of these urinary issues happening again, and if I'm recommending canned, I want them on a high protein, low carb. Another category where I'm routinely recommending these diets, recently adopted cats and kittens. And why is that? Because I would rather prevent the obesity and the diabetes and the urinary issues rather than have to treat them after they have already occurred. Cats can be extremely focused on what kind of food they eat. And if we create a dry food addict, it can be really hard to get them onto canned food. So I prefer that these guys just start with high protein, low carb canned diets. I put the note up there about indoor cats because although I'm recommending these for all cats, no matter what their situation, indoor cats' lack of exercise has been shown in and of itself to be a risk factor for diabetes. So I want to do everything possible to reduce that risk. I have a cute little kitty picture there. Yay. All right. Now, what about the adult cat? He's been on dry food all his life. He comes in to see me for an annual. He's healthy. He's a normal weight. The owner's happy. The cat's happy. What then? This one is hard because those owners don't see a need to change. And you've got what looks like a perfectly healthy, svelte cat in front of you, for now. But there are cats. I mean, back in the day, I had a cat who lived to be almost 17 on all dry food. There's lots of those cats running around. So this is where more research would really help us. What we really need are the long-term feeding studies to know. Because my question with these particular cats is this cat at higher risk for inflammatory bowel disease in 5 or 10 years down the road? We don't know. A lot of people strongly suspect yes, but we don't know. Are these cats at higher risk for kidney disease and kidney failure 5 or 10 years down the road? A lot of us suspect they might be, but we don't know. We don't have the studies. Those studies just haven't been done. So, completely forgot what I was going to say. Plain truth is, we have lots and lots of speculation. we don't have the hard data to prove it. The other plain truth is that there are a lot of factors that go into whether a particular individual develops a particular disease. It's like, yes, food is one of them, but so is genetics. So is environmental stress, especially for cats. Those interviews they have with people that have lived to be 100? It's like, tell us your secrets so we can copy everything you do. And you have all these people over here who ate the Mediterranean diet all their lives, and they walk 10 miles a day shepherding their sheep or whatever. And you always have the 110-year-old woman over here who's like, I smoked all my life, and I have whiskey and bacon every day. And you're like, what is that about? It's like, So we have so many unanswered questions about cat nutrition, about our own nutrition. So this is my thinking, take it or leave it, is that while we don't have the studies to prove that these diets are better long term, we also don't have any studies, any arguments, or any evidence from anybody that shows they're worse. And we have a lot of compelling arguments and speculation that they may be better. So, if we're going to wait for all the research and the studies, I don't know about your cats, mine are going to get really hungry in the meantime. So if we decide to give high-protein, low-carb diets a whirl, then which diets are those specifically? How do we pick? How do we know which ones are best? I mean, we go to the pet food store and we pick up cans and we look at labels, but what exactly are we looking for? Well, when you look at a label, I'd like you to remember something. Labels are teensy-weensy little billboards. They have a lot of ads with a little bit of fact thrown in. And it can be really hard to distinguish the ads from the fact. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, kind of break that down a little bit. Because you walk into a pet food store and, you've got this going on. And it can be really hard to know what all this means and how important is it and what do I need to pay attention to. 25 years ago when I graduated veterinary school, I knew every premium brand of pet food on the market, every single one. Now, not a week goes by where a client does not tell me that they're feeding their cat some brand I have never heard of. And they're like, what do you think about this? I never heard of it. I have no idea. Cat food in the US, I'm not talking all pet food, I'm just talking cat food, is a $6.1 billion a year industry. And that is only expected to keep going up. So in the past couple of decades, there have been a lot of people who have jumped on this gravy train. And once they've made their food, their job now is to convince you to buy it. So when we look at a label, first thing we're going to look at is the ads on the label. This is actually in the industry called romance copy. This is what they're using to get you to pick that can from all the other cans on the shelf. And I'm going to start with my very favorite one. Grain-free. When you hear grain-free, what is that? What pops into your head when you hear grain-free?
You think it's all meat. You know it's
all meat.
But that's what you think.
That's what you think. What do you think? What does it make you think about the carb level? Oh, low carb. Okay, so we're done. Canned food, grain-free, we're done. Yeah, no. Grain-free is, in my opinion, the biggest single marketing gimmick that confuses the crap out of my clients. So I invite you that when you see a grain-free claim, take a look at the ingredient list. And chances are, not always, but chances are good, you're going to see something like this. Deboned beef, beef broth, which sounds so much better than water sufficient for processing. Beef liver, dried egg product, peas. Natural flavor, potato starch, potato, carrots, cranberries, organic alfalfa. So, again, this is a premium food that's on the market. This is taken directly from the label. Carb content of this food, 18%. It's a grain-free food. They're not lying. It's grain-free. But what a lot of manufacturers are doing is simply substituting other carbohydrate sources. Carbohydrates are cheap. Most commonly, they're using potatoes, sweet potatoes, peas, A lot of times they're adding veggies, and I don't care what the fancy claims on their fancy website say, your cats do not need to be eating blueberries for antioxidants. And I will stand by that. So, and this is the thing about grains. Unless a cat has an actual bona fide food allergy to a grain, which, contrary to what most of us have been led to believe, is not common. Top 3 dietary allergens in cats: beef, dairy, fish. Far, far, far more common than grain. Can cats be allergic to grain? Yes, cats can be allergic to anything. You can develop a food allergy to anything. But where statistically the incidence of grain allergies is here, beef, dairy, fish. Much, much more common. So unless that cat has an actual allergy to a grain, I have yet to see anything either in the literature or in my practice experience that leads me to believe that grains are any more inherently evil than any other carbohydrate source out there. So as far as I'm concerned, grain-free is simply a hugely successful marketing gimmick. No byproducts. So companies that are trumpeting the no byproducts claim, they're playing off a couple things. Number one, the fact that many people do not know what byproducts are, actually. And also, this instinctive ew factor. It's like, ick. So I'm going to digress just for a few minutes, and we're going to talk about what byproducts actually are. So first of all, the first thing I want you to know is that ingredients are legally defined. Companies cannot just put terms on their ingredient list that they've made up. The FDA oversees all this. Pet food labels are highly regulated, and they have to use legally defined terms as defined by the FDA. So if you see something on a label, an ingredient, and you don't know what it is, like animal byproduct meal, like what the heck is that? You can look that up. You can look that up on the FDA website. You can look that up on AFCO website and find out what it is. So meat byproducts, you'll see this a lot in a lot of canned foods. This includes organ meats, liver, kidney, spleen. Bear in mind that these are byproducts, not because they're gross and blah, but because people don't want to eat them. At least people in this country do not want to eat these things. So there's a very small human market, so they get put in the pet food market. Legally, meat byproducts cannot be rendered. They have to come from freshly slaughtered animals. And if the animal was slaughtered, it means it had to be able to walk into the slaughterhouse. So that automatically eliminates the 4D animals, the down, diseased, dying, dead, that so many of us associate with byproducts. These cannot, by law, include horn, hair, teeth, any other inedible or contaminated materials. And when you see meat in meat byproducts, legally that means it has to come from cattle, sheep, swine, or goats. Now, many manufacturers do provide more identification because beef byproducts sounds a lot better than just like meat byproducts, which brings up mystery meat kind of thoughts. So a lot of them will say pork byproducts, beef byproducts. But if you just see meat, you know it had to come from one of those 4 species. If it came from another species other than one of those 4, it has to be specifically identified on the label by law. Venison byproducts, rabbit byproducts, something like that. Poultry byproducts are similarly defined. Now, poultry byproducts, again, internal organs. This can include heads and feet, legally. No feathers. And many times, the manufacturers are specifically identifying them as chicken byproducts or turkey byproducts. So when we see meat byproducts and poultry byproducts, this is what a hunting cat eats. A hunting cat is not delicately stripping all the muscle meat off the skeleton and leaving everything else. And if they did, they would become deficient pretty quickly. They are eating the internal organs. They are eating, if they're eating for hunger, they're eating the heads, they're eating the feet, they're eating everything. So So for me, a hunting cat is eating their meat and their meat byproducts. So that's what this is. Now there's another whole class of byproducts, and because this is rarely, if ever, used in canned food, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just so you guys know, anything with meal in it, and these are all the allowable ingredient names with meal in it, anything with meal in it has been rendered, which means that it was cooked at high heat to kill bacteria and pathogens. By law, FDA says that any animal, like a 4D animal, that any meat or tissue off that animal has to be rendered before use. It is otherwise considered adulterated and unfit for consumption by people and by animals. It has to be rendered. So if you see meal, you know that that was rendered tissue. So again, if you're feeding canned food, meals are almost exclusively used in dry foods. So, and there's some other information there. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that. So getting back to the no byproducts claim. Again, these companies are kind of playing off of that automatic ick factor. But organ meat, as we know, is highly nutritious. But the big catch is you can't tell the quality of the byproduct ingredient from the label. And that's the big catch. So if you've got poultry byproducts, is it mostly organ meats or is it mostly chicken heads? You don't know. That's where working with or getting products from a reputable company can be really, really valuable. Nutro, for example, the Nutro company on their website states that when they use poultry byproducts, they will only work with suppliers who keep all heads and feet out of their poultry byproducts. They will not allow it in their food. So, that kind of information can be really hard to come by. So it depends, it comes down to, do you trust the company? If you decide to not have byproducts, that you're not losing anything by that. And some people just prefer, it's like, I don't even want to deal with it. I don't want that in my cat's food. That's fine. You're not going to lose anything nutritionally by that. It's still going to be a complete and balanced diet. You're going to pay more. And you have to be able to take the word of the company. And Blue Buffalo is headed to court right now for this. They claimed no byproduct. Unlike all their nasty competitors, they never use byproducts in any of their foods. Unfortunately for their customers, that was found to be false. And they are now being sued. Okay. Natural. Everything's natural. Well, the reason everything is natural, FDA actually has no, they say as far as they're concerned, that word has no meaning when it comes to pet food. AAFCO, which is the American Association of Feed Control Officials, says that a natural product is one where all the ingredients are derived from animal, plant, or mined sources. There can't be any ingredients from chemically synthetic processes, with the exception of some micronutrients, like vitamins and certain minerals. In their statement on this, AAFCO specifically says that the ingredients can be processed in any number of ways, including rendering, and still considered natural for a label claim. So considering that when you're making a food, probably most of your ingredients are going to be animal, plant, or mineral, natural as a claim doesn't mean a heck of a lot, which is probably why we see it everywhere. One thing, there are tons of other romance copy claims that are out there. You can look them up again on the FDA or AAFCO websites to find out, if they're legitimate or what they mean or not mean. But one really good thing to know is that these regulations only apply to the labels on the actual can or bag. The companies can legally use any or all of these claims in their marketing materials, including their brochures and their websites. That is completely unregulated. So buyer beware. All right, so that's the romance copy. What about the facts? Nutritional adequacy statement. Just very quickly, all pet foods on the market are required to state that the nutrient profile of that food meets or exceeds the requirements set by AAFCO. There should be a statement somewhere on that food. And there's a couple different ways that companies can prove this.
Is that on the label itself?
It should be on the label itself. Yes, it is required to be on the label. Ingredients. Now, somebody could give an entire lecture on breaking down and deciphering the ingredients list on pet foods. It would not be me. I would go to that talk, though. So just for our purposes today, just a couple of things quickly. You probably already know that ingredients have to be listed in descending order by weight. Because we're mostly concerned today with looking at carbohydrate content, look at the ingredient list. If there's a bunch of carbs listed, good. Now, that may not mean that it's a high carbohydrate food, but it does mean you want to do a little bit more digging. And I'll give you a resource for that in just a minute. Look also for ingredient splitting, and that's where manufacturers are allowed to take an ingredient and split it into its constituent parts and list them all separately. So, we've got corn flour, corn gluten, corn starch, a little bit of corn, a little bit of corn, a little bit of corn. You add up all that corn, you get a fair amount of corn. But that can be tough to tell from the label. And be aware that canned foods that that have gravies or sauces tend to be higher in carbohydrates. That's a good thing to know. All right, guaranteed analysis. All right, this ought to be getting us somewhere in our quest for carbohydrate levels. It is required that the manufacturer put on the label protein, fat, fiber, and moisture, otherwise known as water. These are reported as maximums and minimums. So, for example, in this particular food, protein, 12%. What that means is that this food is guaranteed to have at least 12% protein in it. Could be more, can't be less. It is guaranteed to have at least 9% fat. It's guaranteed to have no more than 1% fiber. And it's guaranteed to have no more than, I can't read that, either 76 or 78% water. Thank you. But that doesn't tell you exactly what's in the food. It just tells you what it's guaranteed not to have more or less of, right? This particular manufacturer also includes ash. Many manufacturers do, but that's not required. That's voluntary. Ash is kind of the rough indication of how many minerals are in the food. And this particular food is guaranteed to have no more than 2.2% ash in the food.
And then it doesn't tell you anywhere whether they're saying no more than or no less than.
Yeah. So that's why I wanted to go over this, because many people don't know this. Everything else that's listed there is not required. It's voluntary. And that's basically marketing. It's like, hey, look at all these fancy things we put in our food. Yay! Yay for us. We're fabulous. You'll notice that there is no carbohydrate amount on this. There will never be a carbohydrate amount on this, voluntary or otherwise, because no one is required to list it, so no one's going to.
Fat either. Oh, no, fat.
Fat is there. Well, there are formulas you can use to try and estimate the carb content from this information, but the problem is that, again, these are just maximums and minimums. This food is guaranteed to have no more than 9% fat, but it could have 10% fat. It could have 15% fat. You don't know. And so any carbohydrate estimate you're going to come up from here is a guess. And you'll see some labels where you add up all that, those four plus the ash, and it comes to more than 100%. Blah! How did that happen? So this is wildly inaccurate. Well, a better way would be to look at the typical nutrient analysis. And what this is where the company takes that food and they have to analyze their foods to know what is actually in the food. And this is a typical nutrient analysis. This tells you this is what is in this food. This much protein, this much fat, this much everything else. And it'll vary a little bit from batch to batch, but this is what's in the food. Unfortunately, you're not going to find that on any label. Very, very few companies will post this on their websites. Most of them do not, which means the only way you're going to get that information is calling up the company and asking for it. Right. Well, yeah, at some point, you gotta believe something in this world. Thankfully for us, a veterinarian did just that. Dr. Lisa Pearson spent, I have no idea how many hours and how much effort obtaining typical nutrient analyses for every canned, pouched, and raw food on the market in the US. She calculated all the carbohydrate amounts and put it all on her website for everybody at catinfo.org. So let's take a look at that. And thank you, Dr. Pearson. So this is just a little snapshot of a tiny little piece of the report. If you print it out, I think it comes to like 11 pages or 15 pages or something like that. And you first look at this, and it's like, numbers everywhere. So let's just break it down a little bit. Really what you want to be looking at is those first 3 columns. And what that tells you is the percent of calories from protein, fat, and carbohydrate, which is exactly what we've been talking about through the whole lecture. Okay? The middle columns, that's all the same information but calculated on something called a dry matter basis. And Dr. Pearson included that because some people like to use dry matter basis. For those of us that are actually feeding our cats, it's better to use calorie basis. So you can just ignore the dry matter stuff. She also very helpfully put calorie amounts for all these foods. Now that you can find, because this chart is current as of 2012. And as far as I know, Dr. Pearson does not have plans to go through this whole exercise again. She does periodically provide updates, limited updates. So if you want to know at least that the calorie amounts are current, that's either going to be on the can, or you go to the manufacturer's website, you look up that specific food, they almost always have the calorie amounts there on the websites. Dr. Pearson also included the phosphorus amounts, and that's if you've got a cat with kidney disease, your veterinarian very likely will be very interested in how much phosphorus is in the food you're feeding. So that's very, very helpful information. Are these carb levels 100% accurate? No, and Dr. Pearson says they're not. She says they are still calculated values based on the information she was given. But they are much, much, much better estimates than anything you're ever going to get off a label. At the end of her report, she also lists the companies that refuse to provide her with nutritional information. There's not very many. I invite you to look at that. They're all premium foods. And my personal opinion is that I will not support, with my dollars or my recommendations, any company that asks me and my clients to pay top dollar for their food and will not divulge basic nutritional information so we can see what we're feeding our cats. That's just me, off my soapbox. Okay. And now we have to look at a kitten. We've been looking at charts and tables. Now we have to look at a little kitten in a little hobbit cloak. Deep breath. All right. Pressing on. So given all that, what is the ideal cat food? Well, everyone has different things they're looking for. But if you ask me what my ideal cat food would be, it would be canned mouse. But don't worry, little mouse. There is no such thing. Number one, the ick factor, I think, would prevent it from ever becoming popular enough for anybody to do. And I believe, I'm not sure about this, but I believe the FDA would take a lot of convincing to allow mice as an actual food source. So, given that there are no canned mice, what would my own personal wish list be? Number one, canned, for all the reasons we talked about. I personally do not believe dry food is an appropriate diet for cats. With everything we know about water depletion and how cats get water, I just don't. I want high protein, 50 to 60% of the calories coming from protein, moderate fat, low carb, under 10%. I don't care if it comes from grains. Me personally, I don't. Protein source, I prefer poultry because, again, beef and fish, huge allergens in cats. Now, cats can become allergic to chicken, too. There's no magic bullet about chicken. And this is where things get really subjective for me. Based on no scientific findings whatsoever, my feeling is poultry is the best I can get to songbird. If I can't get mice, then I can at least get bird. I have no idea if that makes any difference whatsoever. So that's just me being, whoa. No fish. I don't want fish. Fish, again, now giving your cat fish every once in a while is totally fine. Most cats are totally fine with that. Just based on my clinical experience and what I have learned over the years from internal medicine specialists and what I have seen, cats that are getting fish as a main protein source, now again, some of them are going to handle it fine. I see a lot of them that start having problems with inflammatory bowel disease, other chronic inflammatory conditions. Fish are highly allergenic. Many of the species of fish that are used in cat food contain a high level of a substance called histamine. Histamine, why we take antihistamines. So I have become convinced, based on my clinical experience, I don't want fish. If I have a chronic vomiting cat coming in for an annual exam, how's he doing? Oh, fine. Does he throw up? Every once in a while. What's every once in a while? Once a week. Okay, not normal. Are you feeding fish? If they're feeding a lot of fish, the first thing I have them do is stop the fish. And not all the time, but a lot of the time, the vomiting stops. Just FYI. Ideally, it would be affordable, because I would like to eat too. But even taking affordable out of the equation, when you look at Dr. Pearson's list, you will see that a lot of the canned cat foods on the market today, that a higher percentage of calories are coming from fat than they are from protein. Well, cats, we know, do well on a higher fat diet. So physiologically, they're built to handle that. So I'm okay with that, but I try and get the protein level up as high as I can. Now, other people have different priorities. Many of my clients absolutely want to be grain-free. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not going to lose anything by going grain-free or byproduct-free. That's totally fine. Some of my clients do not want GMOs in their food. I have a lot of clients who, for whatever reason, because they travel or their schedule, their lifestyles or whatever, they need to be able to feed some dry. And they're like, well, I'm interested in feeding canned food, but I have to be able to feed some dry. And then, I work out with the client what we can do in terms of get some high-protein, low-carb canned into this cat's diet and at least try and reduce the dry as much as we can. And that's where we're just trying to make the best decision for that individual cat. All right, what about raw? This opens up another whole can of worms. And I think this also could be a lecture in and of itself. I have a lot of clients and colleagues who are feeding their cats raw, and the cats are doing great. Over the years, I have had a few cats on raw that did not do well. Not all raw diets are created equal, just like not all canned foods are created equal. So if people are interested in feeding raw, then my recommendations, based on what I've learned over the years, plus I just love that picture. And I love the fact that someone took a picture of it before shooing the cat away. But if you're going to feed raw, that's not how you want to do it. That cat is, if that's all that cat was eating, would become really deficient really fast. Okay. So if we're going to feed raw, I prefer it's made by a commercial, reputable company, where we have a nutritional adequacy statement that we know that diet is complete and balanced, where the company has some kind of protocol in place to reduce or eliminate bacterial contamination. Some companies are using something called high-pressure processing, which is not heat-based, does not cook the food, does not alter the food. And where the company has strict quality controls in place, such as test and hold. And what test and hold is where every batch of food is tested, usually for Salmonella, Listeria, and E. coli, and that batch is held until the results come back. And if the results are okay, then that batch is released. There are companies that are doing very, very strict protocols on this. And I think that's fabulous. What about homemade raw diets? I tell my clients all the time, I have nothing against feeding raw meat. I have all kinds of things against raw meat coming out of modern slaughterhouses. It is not the same as freshly killed prey. There's too much bacterial contamination. And we know this. We know this from the studies that have been done on supermarket meats, the kind of stuff that grows off that. So I know people who are doing it. Their cats are fine. For myself personally, it's not something that I can recommend. My clients do, because I'm worried about the bacterial contamination. So, well, what about cooked homemade diets? I have clients who are interested in doing this, and Dr. Pearson said something on her website, which I firmly agree with, which is, if you're going to do it right. Cats have stringent nutritional requirements. And there was a study done in 2013 looking at homemade diets for dogs, not cats, dogs. And the study looked at 200 diets that were readily available on popular websites, pet care books, embarrassingly enough, veterinary textbooks, and found that all but 4 of them were deficient in either minor or major nutrients. Some of them were excessive in some things like minerals to a level that was detrimental. And that was dogs. Dogs are easier to cook for nutritionally than cats are. Now, it's not that you can't do it for cats, or it's super, super difficult and you have to be an astrophysicist, but it's just, if you're going to do it, just please do it right. There's a company called balanceit.com that is a great resource for homemade diets, and they have lots of diets that are available for free. They also sell the supplements that go along with it to be sure that the diets are complete and balanced, and that is run by board-certified veterinary nutritionists.
What's the name of it?
Balanceit.com. And the reason I emphasize, if you're doing this, do this in conjunction with a board-certified veterinary nutritionist. The reason and Balanceit is run by board-certified people. The reason I emphasize the board-certified is because anybody can call themselves a veterinary or animal nutritionist with absolutely no education or training in physiology, veterinary medicine, or even nutrition. So if you run across someone who's touting themselves as an animal nutritionist, just please do your due diligence and check credentials. When I was initially thinking about this talk and thinking of things I wanted to include, one of the things that I was thinking of was talking about how to transition these dry food addicted cats over to canned food. I quickly realized that again, in and of itself, could be a whole lecture. There is a very, very good, thorough, excellent article on Dr. Pearson's website, catinfo.org. It's actually called Transitioning the Dry Food Addict to Canned Food. When I did it with my cats, after that lecture by Dr. Greco, we were doing we're just going to mix a little bit in at a time. My cats were like, woohoo, finally! And they completely ignored dry food from day one. And they're like, thank God she got the memo. So my cats were easy. But some cats are going to be very, very difficult. Cats become habituated to the texture of their food, the shape of their food, all kinds of things. So it can be hard, but her article is very, very good. Again, that's on catinfo.org. The one thing I want to say about that, and again, you guys are all pretty savvy, so I'm sure you know, never ever get into a war with your cat about food. Tough love, where you say, you're eating what's in that bowl, or you'll starve. And the cat's going to be like, starve. And they will starve themselves right into liver failure. So you just want to do this carefully. Okay, that's all I have. Well, thanks for coming, you guys. It was fun.